Greetings and welcome to A Contemplative Reader, where together we will explore the mysterious, the mystical, the spiritual, and the otherworldly in various forms of literature. Today we will be exploring the second book in the Edan Trilogy by Philip Chase, the Prophet of Edan. I have my legal pad here because there's lots of notes I want to go through and don't want to forget anything, so let's go. The Prophet of Edan begins right where The Way of Edan, the first book in the trilogy, leaves off. There is a war of domination begun by the high priests of the Way of Edan in the kingdom of Torland, and that is continuing across the land of Jormungand. King Yerkenwald, the leader of Torland, is not satisfied with the conquest of his neighboring kingdoms. He wants control of the whole land. And this time, he has dragons on his side, controlled by the priests of the Way. So those who are in their path seem to stand very little chance to resist them. Now, while this book involves perhaps less world building and involves more action, there is still a whole lot of religious and mythological world building in this book for me to cover in this review. As I mentioned in my review of The Way of Edan, which you can find on my channel, and I will link it in the notes to this video, this is not an unbiased commentary or review, as I do consider Philip to be a friend, although we still have not talked in person yet. I think we're going to be doing that soon, hopefully. Also, this review contains what you might call some spoilers for The Way of Edan, because by mentioning certain characters' names, you can figure out who lived in The Way of Edan. And by extrapolation, you might also figure out who died in The Way of Edan. And as I get into the details of the Prophet of Edan, I will be reviewing some of the themes, some of the events, but I will try and do it in a largely spoiler-free way, or at the very least, maybe just some what you might call minor spoilers of the events of this second book of the Edan Trilogy, the Prophet of Edan. I want to begin by noting that I read this book over the summer, and then in August of this year, the audiobook narrated by Alan Walker came out. So I actually wanted to listen to that before I offered this review. So I want to begin by offering a few comments on the audiobook to the Prophet of Edan. So I think I can just succinctly say that it is excellent. It is another great job by Alan of narrating this particular book. Alan does a great job with the character voices. A lot of times when you're listening to an audiobook, you might be confused about, who's talking now and what's going on. With his narration of the character voices, you always know who is talking because he does such a great job of making each character sound distinct. And along with that, there's a lot of different accents involved because Jormungand is a large area and there are various different peoples involved. So he does a great job of incorporating different accents into these characters' voices. Also, what I want to note is that Alan, in this second book in particular, seems to have found his voice as a narrator when he is not voicing the various characters. Now, Alan does not have what you might call a classic narrator voice, but he does have his own unique voice, which I think does an effective job of conveying the action that is going on here. And as I mentioned, there is a lot more action in this book, and he always does a fine job of making that action go at a relatively fast pace. It's such a pace that, in fact, sometimes I don't listen to audiobooks at a greatly increased speed, but oftentimes I will listen to them maybe at 1.3, 1.4 times normal speed. With Alan's narration, he goes along fast enough that I could maybe go up to about 1.15 or 1.2. So he keeps the action moving, which is great, but also he does a great job when it's time to slow down. And I'll get more into that when I cover the spiritual themes of this particular book. So I would highly recommend getting Alan's narration of the Prophet of Edan. It's available on Audible. And in particular, I think this would be a great, if you'd like to do immersive reading where you're listening to the audiobook at the same time you're reading it, I think this would be a great book to do that with. So, on to some of the spiritual themes of this book. A few general comments at the beginning. Again, the context of this story is this religious war instituted by the fanatics of the religion of the Way of Edan, led by the high priest Bledla. Chase, again, does a great job of not using this particular backdrop to the story to engage in a diatribe against all religion. Again, he shows how spirituality and faith are a good thing when it is not used for domination of others. And that shows up through the various characters and their relationships in this book. Again, he continues, just as he did in Way of Edan, to incorporate elements of various world religions, such as Christianity, Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism, and mythology. Once in a while, these are the kind of little, you might call them Easter eggs that I enjoy finding. He'll drop in little references, little quotes within the dialogue of the story, which are direct allusions or even perhaps quotes to scripture, for example. For example, one time he describes how the scales fell from the eyes of one particular character, which is a direct reference to how St. Paul's scales fell from his eyes on the road to Damascus, as that story is portrayed in the book of Acts from the Bible. That's just one example of many. Again, I'm not covering all of the spiritual themes of this book or the connections, just some that stood out to me. So the spiritual backdrop of this story influences the themes of the book and how the characters deal with things such as grief. There's a lot of death in this book. Again, some beloved characters. Again, not going to spoil who. Some beloved characters don't make it. There's sacrifice. There's loyalty. There's commitment. On to the first of kind of three categories of spiritual themes that I want to cover in this review. The first, I think the Prophet of Edan does a great job of exploring the spiritual journeys of these characters, some of these beloved characters that we continue on from the Way of Edan, and shows how their spiritual journeys intersects with the events of this book as the war of the Way of Edan broadens and gets even more intense. So first, Norn the Dwerg, this kind of dwarf-like person. Often he is the funniest character in the book. Just a side note, I will note, I think there's more humor in this book than I remember finding in The Way of Edan. But that humor is often mixed as to the character Norn with moments of deep introspection marked by dealing with his grief. His prayer is often deeply shaped by communion with his ancestors. They are a living reality to him, and that helps him get through the tremendous losses that he has suffered. So I think that shows how his spiritual journey unfolds. Also, we have Orvandil, the Viking-like warrior. There are moments when he reflects on who he is meant to be. Is he just a warrior for hire, or is he something more than that? Does he fight just for the sake of fighting, or does he fight for what is right and just? And the book does a fine job of showing how he reflects on these things and his character grows throughout the course of the story. Then we have Sequara, the heir to the throne of Asdorlad, and one who also possesses a strong gift of this wizarding magic. Along with that gift comes with the need for detachment. This is common to, in our world, the contemplative and ascetic traditions of world religions. And that comes into conflict with Sequara's relationships in this book. And it shows how she has to navigate that need for detachment from those who are close to her and her own emotions, but she is still a very, real human being who has to deal with these feelings and thoughts and emotions and relationships and how they unfold in this book. So we get another fine example of showing how her character progresses throughout the story. Then, of course, we have Dave Raven. Much of the book tells us how he continues to deal with this great gift and burden which has been placed upon him. Again, he had this innate sense of the gift in him, but it was magnified immensely through his encounter with the elf, which left this elf shard within him, leading him to be believed to be the only one who could stand against Bledla and his dragons in this book. And the book does just such a great job of how he struggles with that burden placed upon him. So it also shows how he deals with who he is now. What kind of relationships can Dayraven have now that he is very different? He has essentially been transformed into a different type of existence because of that presence of the elf shard within him. Also, are his powers dependent upon spells and songs? Or are his powers a gift that are just simply a part of who he is now? Those are some of the themes and questions that the book deals with as well. The next category of spiritual themes and content in the Prophet of Edan that I want to cover are Chase's excellent balance between action and contemplation. Again, the war is fully underway in this book, so there are moments of intense action in this book. There are battles and chases, all depicted with graphic realism. But those moments are almost always interspersed with moments of silence, moments of thoughtful interactions between characters, moments where there is essentially kind of a mystical communion with that which is beyond our ordinary existence. It seems like each and every battle or chase is followed by such a moment. So Dr. Chase does a great job of reminding us that while action furthers the story and makes it exciting to read, it is always balanced by times when we need to stop and reflect. There's a beautiful example of Chase's use of silence, and it's found early on in the story, and I want to read that to you. It's only on page 33, so I don't think it's a big spoiler for the book, and that is the anticipated reunion between Dayraven and his great aunt Erd. Again, it's such a beautiful passage. I'm just going to read it to you here now. A small form waited just inside the shadow of the palace's main doors, and Dayraven recognized Erd even as he felt the familiar presence of the gift in her. As the two guards at each of the doors bowed to Socorra, the old woman stepped forward into the sunlight and gazed back at Dayraven. Her eyes narrowed, and she tilted her chin up as she frowned. New lines creased the skin of the old woman's delicate face. Dayraven could not have said which was greater, his relief at seeing her or his guilt at the disaster that was his journey, his joy at her presence or his shame at his failures. Unable to keep looking at his great aunt, he stood with his hands folded before him and stared down at the colorful stones that were part of the mosaic beneath his feet. No one else spoke or moved as Erd approached her grandnephew and stepped in front of him. The old woman reached up to grasp Dayraven's chin and moved his head until he looked her in the face. While appraising him with the frown still chiseled on her face, she seemed to read everything that had happened to him in her eyes, which grew misty. When a single tear spilled over and ran down his cheek, Erd broke her gaze and embraced him. He returned it, and they trembled as they wept together. Notice that not a single word was said in that passage, but what a great sense of emotion and feeling that particular passage evokes in you. I think it just shows Chase's growth as an author to be able to write a scene like that and not have any words spoken by the characters involved in that. So the third spiritual theme that I want to cover here is a theme of emanation and return. That is a theme which is common in various philosophical and religious writings in different traditions. In the philosophical tradition, it's found in the Platonic or Neoplatonic tradition, and it's also, as I mentioned, that is incorporated into various world religions. So, what do I mean by emanation and return? Well, it is a general concept that there is a divine or a cosmic realm from which emanates or descends elements of that divinity or cosmic power into the world of ordinary things. And then there is a return or an ascent of the ordinary into that divine or cosmic or infinite realm. In Christianity, for example, that is found, that theme of descent and ascent into the divine, the infinite, found, for example, in the New Testament book of Philippians, chapter 2, sometimes referred to as the Christ hymn, where it depicts how the divine, the Son of God, became human through the person of Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified and died, but then he was ascended into glory back into the kingdom of God. So it's just an example of that type of emanation and return theme that is found in philosophy and world religions. And that paradigm shows up in this book when Day Raven's life intersects with what is known as the realm of origins. He has the gift in him, again magnified by the presence of this elf shard, and so that cosmic power emanates from the realm into him, and then he ascends back into that realm during various mystical experiences described in the book. In the realm of origins, he has passed through a liminal threshold beyond the world of finite existence into an infinite reality which is very different, and time itself doesn't even seem to exist. In fact, there's a lovely quote in the book: "It is not a place and time, but a state outside of place and time. It was nowhere and everywhere." So again, I think Chase is using that paradigm of emanation and return in his writing in this book. And I think he's also adapting, again, just to borrow part of theology from the Christian tradition, what is sometimes referred to as, in the Greek words of kairos and chronos, to describe time. Chronos, from which we get the word chronology, describes the ongoing march of time in the normal world, but kairos is divine time or cosmic time, or that which is outside of time, where time is very different or seemingly not at all. It is infinite. And so I think that was kind of a beautiful juxtaposition whenever you saw Day Raven going from worldly existence into that cosmic existence of the realm of origins. So the book ends in a way which sets up, I think, the third book, Return to Edan, quite nicely. Makes it clear that there are more spiritual journeys and themes which will continue into the third book, and I'm greatly looking forward to it. So if you're into lots of religious and spiritual themes in your fantasy books, again, this book comes highly, highly recommended. Thank you for watching. Peace be with you.